everybody. Today we're going to learn about how the United States started to become an imperialist power, like a lot of other industrialized countries were becoming in the late 1800s. And the regions the United States expanded into that we're going to learn about will be Alaska, Hawaii, Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and then also we had a very important canal built, Panama Canal. So we're going to learn about all these different things. And when you watch these little video clips, then I want you to answer the questions on Nearpod and make sure that you guys are doing your best because you will get a participation grade based on how well you participate in Nearpod. So anyway, let's get started. So the first region we're going to learn about is how the United States got Alaska. Now we had to do now on Alaska, the Klondike Gold Rush, but I'm going to go into a little of that prehistory before that happened in the late 1890s. All right, so let's share my screen and let's get started. All right. So Alaska, obviously this has been a state in the U.S. since 1959. So before that, it was just a territory of the United States. It is our northernmost territory. The highest peaks in all the United States are located in Alaska. And originally, Alaska, of course, was probably, some of you guys know it's ancient history. This is how the Native Americans got into the United States about 12,000, 14,000 years ago. There were a group of nomads. They were hunters and gatherers from Siberia, which it's now the Asian part of Russia. They were hunting woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers and things like that. And they crossed a land bridge called Beringia, which is now covered by the Bering Strait. And so they came into North America thousands of years ago. And as those thousands of years would go on, they would expand to different parts of the Americas, whether it be North America, Middle America, the Caribbean, and South America. So that's how they originally got here, was through Alaska. And in the 1800s, Alaska was part of the Russian Empire. And if you remember last year in world history, you probably learned, well, I know in my class, we learned about the Crimean War. And the Crimean War took place in the present-day Ukraine, in the Black Sea region, over in Europe. And Russia was getting a little bit too expansionist for their britches. And so to help Turkey, or I guess we should say the aging Ottoman Empire, France and Great Britain came in and they defeated Russia. And so Russia lost in the Crimean War. And that was in, let's say, the 1850s. And so after that, Russia was pretty worried that their land, which is in present-day Alaska, was a little too close to the British and that they would not be able to defend it. Because if you know of their present-day Canada, that is still part of the British Commonwealth, and British Columbia and the Northwest Territories, they're right by Alaska. So the Russians are figured, hey, we can't really defend it, so let's try and sell it. So they started to come to the Americans because they don't want it to go to the British, and because then they would be right next door to Russia. And so they came to us in the 1850s. But this is when sectionalism and all the roots of the Civil War was going on. So, we really weren't interested in purchasing any land at that point. Because remember the debates that were going on in Congress and whether or not to let slavery. So the Americans, they had their eye on different things. So when the Civil War was over, the Secretary of State at the time, William Seward, who actually had an assassination attempt on him the same night Abraham Lincoln got shot at Ford's Theater. But he survived. He's still the Secretary of State under Andrew Johnson, and he got the opportunity to purchase Alaska from Russia at just 2 cents an acre, which is about $7.2 million at that time. And a lot of Americans, they were happy with the purchase. You remember, this is Reconstruction. There was a lot of political crap going on between the radical Republicans and the Democrats and Andrew Johnson. So a lot of people's like, hey, buy it. At least, it's something different. And there were a few critics of Seward's purchase, and because they thought that there was nothing in Alaska that was worth anything. The critics called it Seward's folly, or Seward's icebox. But for the most part, people were happy, or at least the Americans were, with the purchase of Alaska from the Russians in 1867. So there is William Seward, the Secretary of State, who managed the purchase of Alaska from the Russians. And if you see where it is, this is where the Native Americans crossed thousands of years ago, and then they fanned out all across the Americas. So this right here was British territory. And that's why the Russians felt, we didn't do so well fighting against the British last time in Crimea. We better cut our losses while we can. So let's get rid of this territory. The Americans will probably want it. So this Arctic wasteland that some of the critics called it turned out to be a treasure filled with forests that you can chop down and use for lumber. Lots of fish up there for commercial fishing, all this different wildlife. And we, as time went on, we discovered there was lots of mineral wealth. And there was coal there was copper, and even gold. And remember, we had a do now where we learned about the Klondike Gold Rush. That took place in 1896. So there really weren't many people living in Alaska. There were Native Americans who lived there, the Inuit, or the Aleuts. They were there. There were Russians who lived there, but once 1867 and it became in the hands of the United States, then the Russians left. And so really there weren't too many American settlers until 1896 in the Klondike Gold Rush. And I think probably one of the biggest reasons why the Americans wanted to purchase Alaska was not for just its resources, but in the hopes that being it was so close to Asia, that we could get into all those lucrative trading deals with China and all those other places in Asia that the Europeans were trading with. Oh, look, there's a Klondike there, and then there's some fish. And that's what they said when they discovered gold in Klondike. So, when the United States purchased Alaska in 1867, then we started to look towards possibly expanding into other territories. And so we will talk about those other territories in a bit. So answer the questions and do the little activities that follow, and then we'll come back and then we'll learn about Hawaii. Oh, by the way, I forgot. 1867. That was the same year that the United States had annexed officially Midway. And Midway is in between Hawaii and Japan. And the U.S. Navy would be stationed there. And it was cheaper for the U.S. Navy to set that up as a coaling station than to go through the Kingdom of Hawaii, which was not ours yet. So that's why we also annexed part of Midway, or the Midway Atoll during that same year. Okay, down to your questions. Okay, so I'm going to stop my share and I'm going to stop record